tax. Rwanda was but a gimmick, and much of the other legislation put in place by the previous government was, in her view, a gimmick, but she's going to get really tough on the gangs, and that is going to solve the problem of small boats coming across the English Channel. Tell me, will this make a difference? Tweet #Farage on GB News or email farage@gbnews.com. I don't think it'll make any difference at all, but we'll have to see. I'm joined in the studio by Graham Stringer MP, veteran Labour MP. It's OK to call you that, isn't it? Blakely and Middleton South. And Tom Pursglove, former Conservative minister who operated in this area. But first, I'm going to get a legal opinion down the line from friend of the programme, Ivan Sampson, specialist immigration lawyer. Ivan, the last government put a legislation in place to say they were going to get tough, they'd solve the problem. This government takes a different approach. I mean, nothing's going to change, is it?
No, I totally agree with you, Nigel. This is just another gimmick of the government wanting to be seen to be doing something. And the policy now seems to be smash the gangs. And this new 78-page bill, I mean, the first part, it's in 4 parts. The first part creates the position of border command. You don't need legislation to do that. The Home Secretary creates that post anyway. Again, it's like they're seen, would be seen to be doing something. Criminalising those handling boat parts or in other articles. There's one problem. The people who are organising this will never land on British soil. How do we prosecute somebody who's never going to be in the UK? The person behind all this, they don't set foot in the UK. It'll be the people in the boat. So if somebody hands a mobile phone to somebody and they use that to help them cross, they could be prosecuted under this new legislation and face 14 years in jail. We want to go after the people who are organising this, and they, I'm afraid, will never touch foot on British soil, and they will never be prosecuted.
Isn't the other problem, Ivan, even if there was a way to prosecute these people, perhaps it could happen in France or Belgium, I don't know, but even if there was, the sums of money involved are so enormous. You know, 3,500 to 5,000 euros a time for people crossing the channel, that even if you lock everybody up, there'll be people there that will come in and replace them.
Indeed, and there isn't a centralised gang. As soon as you stop one gang, another will come in its place because, as you said, the vast sums of money involved. There's only one way to stop small boats crossing. It's to stop them getting on in the first place. And we need to push the French. It's their border. They've got to control their border. And we need to push them to properly secure their side. We can't do it. And we've got to have an agreement with, an international agreement with the French authorities to stop people getting on in the first place. That is the only way. Now, when Yvette Cooper was in opposition, she was lambasting the Conservative government for not having safe and legal routes. It's because there are no safe and legal routes is why people take the risk. And these deterrent measures will make no difference in stopping the gangs or indeed deterring people from getting on the boats and making those risky journeys.
OK, Ivan Sampson, thank you very much indeed. Graham, you know, you've knocked on a few doors in your time and met a few constituents. This whole business of young men in vast numbers crossing the English Channel, being given new iPhones, it drives people potty. Do you have any confidence these measures will change things?
Sadly, I don't. I wish they would, because my constituents are really angry about this. We don't know who's coming in. It's nearly all young men. They're paying a lot of money. They're sometimes putting children in the boat and putting children's lives at risk. But I don't believe it will work. If counter-terrorism legislation worked to deal with gangs, we wouldn't have gangs in Manchester, Liverpool, London. There are gangs all over the country, let alone trying to stop them in another country, in France. I understand what was being said about stopping people getting on the boats. That would help. But I think it's the draw as well. People are coming from a safe country, France, and until we either sort out the 1951 Refugee Convention and say you're going back, you're not getting asylum here until we say, until we stop illegal working in this country. When people
how do we stop illegal working? I mean, you're right, but how do we stop it?
We inspect. You can go into any car wash. You can go into all sorts of places in Manchester, in clothing places. I know, so the police must know that there are people being paid well below the minimum wage. So we put effort into saying to people, you come here, you won't be able to work, you won't be able to stay, you're going back to France, it's not possible. It's the demand factor, and we're doing the opposite in some ways. You mentioned giving people phones. It's quite extraordinary.
No, it is. I mean, Tom, you know, you were Minister for Illegal Immigration for a period of time, amongst other jobs that you did in the last government. I mean, she says Rwanda was a gimmick. I know that you believed in it and believe in its deterrent value, but isn't the real truth of it, all the while we were part of ECHR, Rwanda was actually never going to work?
Well, I disagree with that, and I think continually
so why did that plane not take off?
Continually legislating on top of this problem isn't going to solve it. What you've got to do is focus on doing. And I think when you look at what, for example, is happening across the pond, President Trump is really focused on driving up removals, but you've also got to deter people from coming in the first place. And I do think that Rwanda had a deterrent effect in terms of stopping people from making that journey in the first place. The numbers speak for themselves. 25% increase in 2024 relative to 2023 in terms of arrival numbers. But you've actually just got to get on and operationalise that partnership, because otherwise you will take
the arrival numbers.
Of people from
the arrival
countries.
Numbers are more dependent on weather than any other factor, and they're up 25%, but down 25%. But you put in place, you know, a whole raft of legislation to attempt to deal with this. Some people argue that the Labour Party today, the Labour government, have watered it down. But none of the tough stuff you put in place, none of it worked, Tom.
Well, Labour voted against all of it, including the life sentences for people.
Sure, but they're in government now. But none of your stuff worked. No one got a life sentence. And even the people on the tillers, right? Only about 7% of those that were reported ever got prosecuted.
I would argue the legislation is working, and things like the one-stop shop measures around removals are helping to see increased numbers of people being removed. There's still a long way to go, but I would get on and use those powers to their maximal effect.
When David Blunkett was Home Secretary years ago, people that came to Britain illegally, they were deported in their tens of thousands in some years. You weren't able to do that, and I'm arguing to you again that actually, however well-intentioned your legislation was, the fact is that court, or perhaps even more particularly, the European Convention being written into British law through the 98 Human Rights Act, left you fairly powerless.
My view would be test the legislation, test the Illegal Migration Act, test the Nationality and Borders Act, test the Safety of Rwanda Act, stand that partnership up and do it. It was handled horribly after the election. I thought the Rwandans were treated appallingly, and until you have a third country where you can remove people to, you are simply on the hook to take unsustainable numbers of people from certain nationalities. Because if you arrive from Eritrea, Sudan, Iran, Iraq,
why don't we just send them back? Why don't we just, and I'm going to argue this point, you know, even though they try and hide their identities, we know where they come from. We know whether it's Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea. I mean, those four countries cover 70% of those that come. Why not just send planes back to Syria?
Well, Syria's been a very dangerous place to go, and less so now.
Well, yes, Syria's a dangerous place, Graham, but maybe some of the people coming from Syria are dangerous.
Absolutely. We shouldn't be allowing them to roam freely through the country. They should be. Not Rwanda. I do think, got great respect for Tom, but I think Rwanda was a gimmick. Only 4 people went.
And they volunteered.
You could try it, though.
They paid them 3,000 quid each.
Well, why didn't you try it as a government? Because the legislation is there, and get on and do it.
Isn't the problem, guys?
I mean, the legislation itself was badly drafted. You declared Rwanda safe forever. I mean, no court was going to accept that they couldn't make a judgment about things like that. So there were flaws in the legislation, there were flaws in the process, until we convince people that coming here will not benefit them. It's the draw, and that they're going to be deported, not necessarily to Syria, but deported from this country straight away, because by and large coming from safe countries, France, then that will stop it. It's not the one thing you have to say, it's not an easy problem.
No, it's a very difficult problem.
But what might stop that? It's all well and good what you just said. Get it, logical, until one of the people about to be deported claims their right to a family life under Section 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which Tony Blair wrote through that Labour government into British law, and the judges will rely on that time and time again. Don't we actually have to get back to the roots of the legislation?
And the courts. I mean, people talk about the Human Rights Act and what Tony Blair did. What he did was bring legislation that already existed under UK courts.
And codified it, basically.
Yes, it came on, because saying you could go to a UK court, I voted for it. It seems sensible. The way the courts have interpreted it has not been sensible. And I think we have to resile from at least that part of it, because we're allowing very dangerous people to stay here. Some big times because it's not a wife and children, it's related to other people. Yeah. That is crackers. Yeah. And we should resile from...
Or even a pet.
I'm not sure if that's true.
Well, Theresa May said it was, it must be. Final word on this subject to you.
You're only going to solve this if people arrive, you detain them, and you relocate them to that third country. And that is the way you break this business model.
And if the judges stop you, what do you do?
For me, I say test this legislation. It's there. It's not yet been tested.
And if it fails?
You have to leave the ECHL.
All right, we got you there in the end. Took a long time. In a moment. Now, I have been banging on for over 3 years on this show about the cost of net zero, particularly to business and manufacturing. It always seemed to me that the more wind turbines we built, the higher our bills became. Well, it would appear even the BBC have woken up to this. I wonder whether there's a big, big change in the weather of this debate coming. All of that in a couple of minutes.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Newly released MI5 files reveal that Queen Elizabeth II was kept in the dark over the treachery of a senior courtier.
Yeah, for almost a decade. This is Sir Anthony Blunt, who played a double life, passing intelligence, the KGB, during World War II as a senior MI5 officer. But, remarkably, he was allowed to keep his position amid fears of a major scandal if the truth came out.
Well, now those files have been released by the National Archives, which includes the Queen's response to finding out a trusted member like Anthony Blunt was really a traitor.
Well, joining us now in the studio is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Good to see you this morning, Cameron. This is astonishing.
Oh, absolutely. And this wasn't a little spy. This was Anthony Blunt was a full-blown spy. He passed to the Soviets the D-Day deception plans during the Second World War. He was working for MI5, but a double agent for the KGB as well.
The wrong plans.
He passed on the plans.
The wrong ones.
The wrong one in 1944. Yeah. Exactly. But he then got a job inside Buckingham Palace as one of the Queen's most trusted aides and courtiers, the surveyor of her art, essentially like kind of an art advisor for Her late Majesty. There was always suspicions about Anthony Blunt way back in the early 50s because he was part of this notorious Cambridge spy ring, a group of 5 boys recruited at Cambridge. 2 of these people fled to Moscow in 1951. Anthony stayed behind in London and subsequently got a job inside Buckingham Palace. And it wasn't until 1964 that he confessed to his treachery. The reason he confessed was because he was granted immunity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point.
He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Some of your thoughts at home on the Smash the Gangs debate and whether Labour's legislation will make any difference. One viewer says Labour won't smash the gangs, but it does guarantee Labour are a one-term government. Weak. Ray says Rwanda was starting to work, really, Ray. The proof being that illegals were travelling to Northern Ireland and going over the border to Ireland to avoid any possibility of being sent to Rwanda. It was never given a proper chance by Labour. Well, I've got some nods over here from Purse Club on that particular point. Alan says, why don't we get real? Politicians of all parties are responsible for the security of our country. Every MP should, under oath, say, stop, no ifs, no buts, end off. Actually, I do genuinely think this is a national security emergency and should be declared as such. Now, net zero. As you know, regular viewers and listeners to this programme, I have been banging on for over 3 years about the cost of net zero, about the way we're doing it in this country. What I found really interesting today was actually, after Rachel Reeves's big speech, talking about AI, talking about the zone between Cambridge and Oxford, by the way, all of which I agree with, but all of which needs vast amounts of cheap energy. Even the BBC have started asking questions about the cost of net zero. Listen to this.
Without you putting a date on it, without you having a target to do that, businesses are really suffering and are unable to plan in all the ways that you want them to plan, and all that bullish talk yesterday. It just doesn't make sense to a company that is facing a bill that threatens its business.
We inherited those high prices, but we are cracking on and investing in the energy infrastructure, reforming the planning system so we can get those grid connections, onshore wind, offshore wind, hydrogen.
Let me promise you something. Every policy announced by this Labour government and the contract signed guarantee that energy bills will go even higher. Now, I'm joined in the studio by one of the high priests of the climate change debate, Donoghue McCarthy, director of the Climate Media Coalition. It's all unravelling, Donoghue. People have finally woken up to the fact, and you know, we could debate climate change separately, but what we're doing in the name of climate change is deindustrialising Britain, giving people very expensive bills, and actually, a couple of times this year, we've been near to the lights going out.
Well, bless you, Nigel, for calling me the high priest, but...
Well, I think you are.
And I'll say, I bless you for...
I meant it nicely.
I bless you for you have sinned, because I actually think you're speaking untruth. Why do I say that?
Come on then.
No, actually, why do you do have a very valid point. Britain does have high electricity prices.
Very high.
Why? I was on with the Daily Mail feature editor the last time I was on with you, and he agreed with me. Why? Because we set our electricity price according to the marginal price, which is we set it to the most expensive electricity on the grid at any one time. What is that? Fossil fuel electricity.
Gas.
Fossil fuel gas is the most electricity, and because we set our marginal price by that, we end up having hugely high electricity. If you look at the grid, I invite maybe you yourself might look at it. There is a website called National Grid Live.
Yes, I was watching it last week when 60% of our energy was coming from gas.
And this year, days will 60 up to 55 is coming electricity. If you watch it, when there's high wind, it goes down to around £23. When there's no wind, it goes up to 143. So what we should argue is we need more green electricity because it's the cheapest, and it's the only one not with any subsidy.
So explain to me.
You're an anti-subsidy person, are you not?
Explain to me, Donna.
You oppose subsidising.
No, I'm absolutely not, and you know that. And we've been subsidising this.
No,
for
you do. We agree. You do oppose subsidies.
We have been for 20 years subsidising this nonsense.
You and I agree. You oppose subsidies, yeah?
How is it that the country that boasts that we've got the most wind energy in the world has got the most expensive prices?
I actually brought the list of price. I looked up the IEA for cost for business electricity, which is what the subject today was. Iceland, 6.4p, 80% green electricity. Norway, 77% green electricity, 6.6p. The UK is at 24p. Why? Because our price is set by fossil fuels. And I'm against subsidy, like you are.
And by the way, they are very small populations, so it's slightly different.
Sweden,
America,
Spain,
America,
Finland. I'm talking about Europe. Finland, Finland, Spain, Portugal, all cheap enough and with more green electricity.
Well, Finland.
The problem is fossil fuels.
Is
Nigel.
nuclear green electricity?
Not to my mind, no. It's subsidised electricity. That's the point I want to make. You seem to always propose that we should go back to relying on fossil fuel electricity and nuclear electricity. Is that correct?
I am saying we will continue to need fossil fuels for decades to come, whatever happens, unless we go nuclear.
But so do you support nuclear and fossil fuels, what we should be based it on?
I think that I think nuclear can provide most of our energy in 10 years' time.
Yeah, and do you know what it's even more electricity than fossil gas? It's 120 to 130 pounds per kilowatt. Electricity is 44.
Well, that depends how you do it.
And there's a second subsidy. There isn't. Do you know what the largest subsidy for energy in this country is? It's the Department of Energy spends £250 billion on what? Cleaning up the waste from past nuclear.
So you're arguing, and by the way, nuclear is much cheaper in the Far East for all sorts of reasons. Much, much cheaper to do, and we could make it.
All across Europe, it's horrendous.
We have got, our industrial energy is 4 to 6 times higher than America's, and the fracking revolution has made America rich.
The American...
Made America rich.
The
jobs, the supply, the exports, it's made America rich.
And all I'm saying is, if you want to have industrial policy in this country, you need to have cheaper electricity, and I'm saying green electricity is cheaper.
Well, I don't know. Graham, you've watched this debate for decades.
I think there's one very big point I would make. You said you didn't want to talk about the climate change debate. But we're doing this and making no contribution whatsoever to reducing carbon dioxide. We're just exporting our industry to the far. Of course we are. You show your head. We are sacrificing our aluminium industry. The steel industry is going. Industry after industry is going. The reason that the energy is expensive is not only because gas is actually cheaper than when you've installed it, but when the sun's not shining, you have an anticyclonic day in December, sun's not shining, wind's not blowing, then we're vulnerable to lights going out, and we've been
saying that for 20 years, Graham. They've never gone out. They went out. They went out in East Anglia. Why? Because a gas power station went down. Not the wind turbines.
They haven't gone out because they're paying a fortune.
And in France last year, we actually ended up exporting electricity to France because of nuclear.
Many times what we're paying, and that's, you're right, that's based on fuel prices, on gas prices. The cheapest way we can transition, if we want to transition, and I'm not sure we need to get gas that's under our feet, gas that we're not allowed to use in the North Sea. We're using gas. Most of our gas is coming from Norway. Ed Miliband says it's coming from the
40% from Norway.
Yeah, it's coming from dictators in the Far East. It's not. It's coming from Norway, and we could have our own.
Fair point. I'm going to get one more point from Tom and let you respond.
Yeah.
Tom?
I think the North Sea oil and gas position is one of the darkest political decisions of the day.
You were part of a government that said, yeah, we've got to go for this. Renewables, the Saudi Arabia of wind. Did Boris get it wrong?
Well, what I've consistently said is that when we look at subsidies, they should be targeted at new and emerging technologies, not standing up established industries that are well financed. And I think one of the challenges with this is that the British people, broadly speaking, do support trying to do right by our environment. But I think it's hard to take people with you on this journey when, for example, you promise that their bills are going to to come down by 300 and they're going up. Winter fuel payment out the window, and when manufacturing jobs.
Got a last point on this. I'm going to make the point and you can finish. The website that you talked about earlier, I was looking at it last week. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday last week, middle of the day, and wind and solar was contributing 2.5%. So we needed gas, and we're going, however many wind turbines we build, and however efficient it becomes, and I hope that it does, because if it doesn't work, it's a disaster, given what we put into it. We're going to need gas for a long time, so we might as well produce our own.
The argument is that if we want to get into zero gas, that's a challenge, but we can get to 90-95% by 2030.
How?
Well, we're actually aiming to do it already.
When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, what are we going to do?
In my house, for 10 months of the year, at night time, my electricity, my heating, my cooking runs off solar. Why? Because I've got a battery.
But it won't power steelworks, will it?
What will power steelworks is green hydrogen. And what the exciting thing about what's happening in the north of Scotland is we have too much wind now, which we can turn into green hydrogen. And the Scottish government is now planning to export a new export industry for Britain, exporting green electricity to Europe.
If green hydrogen works, we'll all be thrilled.
Good.
We will all be thrilled.
It's on its way.
The problem is, it doesn't.
Why?
And I've been hearing for 20 years that it's coming. Forgive me for my scepticism.
They're doing green hydrogen steel in Sweden.
Yeah, it's not going to power the national grid. Donna, it's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. It really is. And he is the High Priest, isn't he? Yes, of course, I was entirely right.
Bless you, my son.
In a moment, we'll talk about America's attitude to how their Navy and services are going to run and ours. And I think perhaps we might conclude that our diversity obsession is damaging our ability to fight.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Strong winds across the Canary Islands, also some wet and windy weather for the Balearic Islands, but largely settled elsewhere across eastern parts of the Mediterranean, particularly for Greece and parts of Italy. But as we move our way westwards, this is where we'll find the unsettled weather, so some heavy showers, also some strong winds at times. But further west, largely settled as high pressure dominates, but that is going to bring in some strong winds at times across Madeira and also Tenerife. But that's where we'll see the best of the temperatures, and also largely settled as we head towards the weekend.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Outbreaks of rain will move through overnight, heavy at times, accompanied by gusty winds, along with some hill snow. They do ease, though, by morning and then turning drier and brighter from the west as the next ridge of high pressure builds in. We've had a ridge of high pressure in place during the day, and under clear skies it will turn chilly for a time during the evening. With rain moving in from the west, that means there'll be some hill snow for northern England and Scotland. Heavy rain elsewhere and accompanied by gusty winds, an unsettled night to come, and a chilly, grey, in places damp start to Friday. A lot of low cloud is expected first thing, as well as some further outbreaks of rain and drizzle, some heavier rain likely through southern counties of England into London and the southeast. That is moving through, though. Wales and the southwest by 7 a.m. starting to turn dry and brighter. Best of the sunshine through Northern Ireland, parts of western Scotland as well, although much of the rest of Scotland staying relatively gloomy with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. But the hill snow that we're expecting overnight, that's tending to fizzle away by dawn, and only a relatively few amount of roads affected by that. Now, the rain in the southeast does ease off during the afternoon, but it stays generally grey with some mist and drizzle in places. Much brighter skies are starting to move in from the west, and a pleasant enough afternoon in western parts, 9 or 10 Celsius with lighter winds. But in the east, well, it stays grey, and we see more of that into the start of the weekend. Low cloud, mist, fog, some pockets of frost where we do have clear spells. But in the northwest, well, the cloud thickens through the morning, and later on the next band of rain moves through. That does sweep across the country once again into Sunday, followed by brighter skies, and the weather continues to stay changeable into the start of next week.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The curse of DEI runs very, very deep through both our public and private sectors, as I found out myself with the banking industry last year. But it's where it's got into the military that I've often scratched my head. In America, things have turned around very quickly and very, very dramatically indeed. And President Trump made this clear absolutely from the start. And he appointed Pete Hegseth. And I went to an event when I was over there for the inauguration and heard him speak. I thought what he said was incredible. Have a look at him on Fox News just yesterday.
What's happening with DEI? How's that going at the Defense Department? Well, DEI is not going well at the Defense Department because it's dead. We will, as the president said in his inaugural, we will be merit-based and colorblind, and that is the case at the Defense Department. DEI is going to be ripped out root and branch because we want everyone treated equally with high standards and held accountable with warfighting, lethality, and readiness front and center. We don't have time for emphasizing differences. Jesse, one of the dumbest phrases in military history is our diversity is our strength. Our diversity is not our strength. Our unity and our shared purpose is our strength.
And that backs up President Trump, who says we are committed to meritocracy and to the elimination of race-based and sex-based discrimination. And Hegseth goes on to say that we want our forces to be lethal killers. He makes the point, we will only use them as a last resort. But war is a last resort. But it's pretty clear the direction that America's going in now under this administration. Oh dear. Let's contrast that with the Royal Navy, once the greatest pride of our nation. Yesterday, a picture, a tweet went out from the Royal Navy Diversity Network. No, I'm really not making this picture up. There it is on the screens in front of you. And the accompanying text says, as chair of the Royal Navy Race Diversity Network, it gives me great pleasure to announce that the existing Royal Navy cultural mess dress policy has just been updated to include wider forms of British cultural identity. I can't just for a moment picture the painted hall. And there it is at Greenwich. It's one of the architectural masterpieces designed by Christopher Wren. And in that great room sat and dined Lord Nelson, Admiral Jackie Fisher, some of the most incredible people in British history. And now you can turn up pretty much wearing what you like for a mess dinner. It sums up where we have gone wrong. I'm joined, I'm very pleased to say, in the studio by a friend of mine, Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, retired US Navy officer. How bad had the woke DEI stuff got in the American military?
It got horribly bad, and we got out of lethality. And we spent so much time on non-merit-based activities, such as DEI and other policies, that we had two problems. One, tooth to tail. Our tooth was thin, our tail was large, which was all these things we were spending our time on. Secondly, we couldn't recruit anybody because men and women that want to serve in the military want to serve to a higher standard and a standard that has merit base to it. And this was the problem with DEI. It diluted our fighting force, and I can't thank the president enough for putting Pete Hegseth in as our secretary, because the first thing the young men and women will respect is that he had dirt on his boots. He's fought in combat. Yes. He's lost men and women under his charge. So if you're a father and a mother and you're going to have your child, your young man and woman serve in the military, I certainly am more comfortable serving under Pete Hegseth.
I have heard that recruitment is up already.
Yes, it is.
But when this stuff's put upon them... See, the question that I ask myself, and we'll come in a minute to our British political guests and ask ourselves about the Royal Navy. The question I've always asked, if you're running the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and government says this is what you've got to do, don't you fight back? I mean, didn't the American military chiefs fight back?
You know what's interesting about the military? When I started serving in 1985 under Ronald Reagan, women couldn't serve in combat. But we were the most inclusive organization on the planet. if you meet the standard. And I was part of the group that brought women into combat. And you know what? They made us a better fighting force. But they'll be the first to tell you, I don't want a different standard. I want to meet the standard that's required for lethality. And so we are the most inclusive organization on the planet. But when you start to dilute the standard, to me, cultural mess stress makes no sense. Mess stress makes all the sense in the world.
I'm going to come back to you in a minute on Diego Garcia, so don't go away. It's hard to believe some of this stuff, isn't it?
It is. It is. I've never served in the armed forces, but I have campaigned with ex-soldiers whose regiment was being disbanded. And boy, were they proud of their cap badges and their uniforms. And they saw it as a unifying factor. And I imagine, well, I've been on warships, that eating in the mess in the same uniform is a unifying thing. You want to emphasise that we're all together. One of the great things I imagine about being in the armed services, which we hope we don't have to use, is that the people of junior ranks have to be in the same place as senior ranks, and they have to be unified, and they have to trust each other. The lower ranks have to trust the officers will make the right decisions, and the officers have to trust that the people will follow them. And that unity is helped by wearing
unity of purpose rather than diversity. I mean, Tom, one of the problems here is all this stuff advanced so much in the last 14 years.
Well, I think that, what is right operationally has always got to be first, second and third.
But it wasn't with that photograph, was it?
But I also find that the sort of sentiment that's been expressed by the US Secretary of State around merit and an approach to this that's based on merit, very refreshing. I remember when the RAF a few years ago got into a lot of bother when it came to discriminating against white male recruits.
Against white males.
And Ben Wallace very firmly came out and called that out. He was right to do so.
They weren't recruiting any. They weren't recruiting
exactly,
white men.
and that's just not acceptable. And, I agree a lot, actually, with what Graham has said there.
I cannot let a retired US Navy Rear Admiral go without asking this question. Diego Garcia, part of the Chagos Islands, we've had sovereignty over it. I think it's one of the big things we give to America, is the ability to use that as a military base. How important is it from a US naval perspective?
It is one of the most strategic bases we have around the world. If you look at where it is geographically, without that base, we have no ability to reach deep into enemy territory in many AORs. The fact is the Chinese, if they get access to that base, will completely change our ability to serve as a blue water navy and also a global presence forward. It is the key base for us to reach into the Middle East and to reach into the Indian Ocean. And it is frightening to me that we may lose access to that base.
Do you think the Trump administration will tell the British government in no uncertain terms?
I imagine they already have.
I think that may well be right, which may well be why it hasn't happened. Mike, thank you very much indeed for joining us. In a moment, well, it was 5 years ago tomorrow that we left the European Union. Just how much of a success or a failure has Brexit been? All of that in just a moment.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Well, specialist from Woolley & Wallace Auction House, Alexandra Aguilar, joins me now. Alexandra, how lovely to see you. And I wonder whether you were going to bring the jewellery in. You're actually wearing the jewellery. So shall we begin with the bracelet?
Right, so it's a diamond line bracelet, as you can see. It's really a beautiful thing. It's made of 27 diamonds with a yellow tint, and they are mounted on yellow gold, and it's really a beautiful, beautiful piece. But there's more to it, and as you mentioned, it's the provenance. It comes from the collection of Elizabeth Taylor, really one of the queens of Hollywood, and it was given to her by Michael Jackson.
Have you any idea why Michael Jackson gave her such a magnificent gift?
They were very, very good friends. They were friends for over 20 years, and he knew her love for diamonds, for jewelry, and we know that they exchanged many presents, including this fantastic bracelet.
Would that have been made new at that time?
Yes, I believe so.
We're talking, what, about the 1970s or something like that?
Oh, maybe a little bit later.
Later, 80s?
Yes, that's right. But what's particularly interesting about this one is all the 27 diamonds have the same color. And it's very difficult to find stones with the same color, with the same yellow tint. So it makes it particularly beautiful and particularly special.
Why do you think it will go for about £70,000?
It's... well, it is a beautiful piece. It's very wearable, as you can see, and there is the provenance is amazing. Jewelry from the collection of Elizabeth Taylor is very sought after, of course.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Now, tomorrow is the 5th anniversary of Brexit. It was 11 p.m. on the 31st of January that we formally left the European Union. Tomorrow, GB News would be doing a big day of coverage. Nana Akua will be live from North Shields with fishermen from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Martin Daubney will be live from Boston in Lincolnshire, which was the biggest Brexit vote in the country. From 12 till 1, we'll have a Brexit special, and Chris Hope will be there with a panel, and it's going to go on all day, the debate about Brexit. This was me 5 years ago at 11 p.m. on the 31st of January.
Let's celebrate tonight as we've never done before. You and all of us have made history, and this is the greatest moment in the modern history of our great nation. Thank you!
Well, in constitutional terms, I was right. It was a massive moment, and I still 100% believe it was the right thing to do. Indeed, I look at the mess the European Union's got itself into, I have no hesitations at all. I do think as a result of it, we have stood taller on the world stage. I think things like the AUKUS deal, frankly, wouldn't have happened without Brexit. I think our intervention over the Ukraine war, which has been quite strong, and you can agree or disagree with the intervention, but we couldn't have done it as members of the European Union. We rolled out a vaccine before everybody else. And again, the point about Brexit was, it doesn't mean everything a British government does you'll like or support, but it does mean we're free to make those decisions. So there have been some good things that have come as a result of it. Our trade with the rest of the world is growing, and that's important because, actually, in economic terms, the European Union is a declining part of the global economy. The big disappointment and the real sense of betrayal that is felt by millions is that one of the main reasons people went out and voted in numbers that nobody could even believe, it was simply to reduce the numbers coming into Britain, and those numbers have exploded. And the small boats, of course, they weren't even happening at the time of the referendum on the European Union. So there's a big letdown on that. The fishing industry feels even more betrayed than it was before. And I think 5.5 million men and women running small businesses out there ask themselves, where have we cut back on red tape? The City of London asks the same question. I'm pleased that we did it. I'm very disappointed in the way it's been delivered. And I just don't think that Boris Johnson's government really believed in it. Tom, whenever I make that point, I'm told, well, COVID came along and but actually, you know, did even Boris really believe it? I mean, you did.
Well, all of us on this panel worked together
we all
in
did.
the campaign, and it's something that I'm incredibly proud of my time in frontline politics. And actually, I would make the point that in terms of coronavirus and the impact it had, actually, being out of the European Union allowed us to develop the Oxford vaccine, which has saved millions of lives around the world.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But, Tom, I'm talking about the way, constituents feel. And I do think getting back control of the borders, reducing the population explosion was a very important motivator.
I agree, and of course it is now absolutely imperative that ministers pull the levers that they have at their disposal to bring numbers down. You couldn't do that when you had EU free. Well, I did do it.
No.
The package of measures that brought them down by 300,000.
You were part of a government that saw immigration numbers explode.
But as the minister, I announced and got on and delivered a package of measures.
Whatever you might have tried to do.
I said there's more to do. But you've got the ability to go and do it because of Brexit.
Graham, am I right to say that's the one area of really biggest disappointment?
It's extraordinary, really, that we got control of our borders for the first time for 43 years. Well, longer than that, actually. And the number of people coming into the country, some illegally, some legally, increased massively.
I know.
And I think, going back to our earlier discussion now, there's a real question for my party. That's Thomas' party. I agree with you. I think they didn't do as much as they could. But my party, the Labour Party, has big decisions to make. I don't believe with the level of immigration we've got at the moment, most of it poor people coming in, not people coming to set up major tech companies or whatever. It's incompatible with the future of the welfare state. Now, that is a really tough ask for a party of the left to put those two things together. But I think we have, talking about Labour Party members, have to face that, and we have to decide whether we're going to invest, increase productivity, control who's coming into the country, deport those people who've got no right to be here, and get on with it. And the point you made at the beginning is absolutely the right point, that Brexit gave us the ability to do what we wanted. And unfortunately...
For good or bad.
For good or bad. Unfortunately, the first government afterwards set about sabotaging Brexit, and there were people in my party set about sabotaging it.
Where will they go now, Graham? I mean, this sort of reset with the European Union. I mean, Starmer's always very clear. He says, no, the red lines are single market, customs union. Does he mean it?
I think they're in two minds. Their soul is with the EU. But they're looking hard. I mean, it's an economic disaster area. The German economy is shrinking. The French credit ratings are going down the tubes. You know, the idea that we will catch growth and do better tied to the European Union, with them deciding our laws.
It's for the birds, isn't it?
It is. If it was true, and I don't believe it was.
I mean, I've forgotten how sound Graham is. I mean, one of the ironies as well, of course, is that some of those in British politics who decry Brexit the most are the first to be out there citing the fact that the UK behind the US is now the second most attractive a place to invest anywhere in the world. I think it can't be both.
It was interesting, wasn't it? There was a conference where tech, AI, my friend Elon and others were discussed, and Starmer was asked by a journalist, well, being outside the European Union, doesn't this make us freer for the technologies of the 21st century?
Exactly.
And he had to admit yes. So it's going to be interesting to watch. As you say, their heart is with the EU, but I think they know. They drag us back too closely. There are millions of Labour voters who will say, no, we don't want this.
I mean, there is a striking statistic, which I came across when I did a debate at Durham University with people from GBNews. And it is that if you take the value, I think it's of the top 4 tech companies in the States, they're bigger than the UK Stock Exchange, the French Stock Exchange, the German Stock Exchange, the Japanese Stock Exchange, all added together. And we would want to go with the European Union? No, we don't necessarily follow the American model, but we need our own model that catches some of that wealth creation.
Yeah, and the great thing with trade and with business, and we're making big decisions, is we're now free to make those decisions, even if sometimes we get it wrong. But we fought, and you and I would disagree on many things, but we fought together to have the freedom to make those decisions. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening in spirited debate. Now, Matt Goodwin is up next. What are you discussing this evening, Matt?
Yeah, well, we're looking firstly at this new plan to smash the gangs that the Labour Party are bringing new legislation forward. Now, we've got some exclusive analysis of that bill. We're going to be looking at actually what Labour really wants to do. We've got an NHS insider blowing the whistle on the new obsession with diversity. We're treating British people in corridors and car parks, but we're finding £80,000 a year for these diversity roles. What's that all about? We're also going to be looking at why young people, according to a new survey, are giving up on democracy. And we've got a member of Gen Z in the studio with us to talk about what he thinks is going on with that generation.
I saw that poll. It was as if they said, we just want strong leadership.
Well, they want answers to problems that our political class don't seem to be able to fix.
A bit sad, though, really, isn't it? Because previous generations thought, well, I guess they'd lived through wars, so to them democracy really mattered. Perhaps that's one of the reasons it matters less to young people.
Well, we're going to hear from the Zoomers themselves, so stick around in a couple of minutes.
Be very, very interesting. Matt, thank you very much indeed. Right, well, that's it. I'm done for the week. I'll be back with you next week. Have a great weekend. First, though, let's have a look at the all-important weather with Aidan McGibbon.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Outbreaks of rain will move through overnight, heavy at times accompanied by gusty winds along with some hill snow. They do ease though by morning and then turning drier and brighter from the west as the next ridge of high pressure builds in. We've had a ridge of high pressure in place during the day, and under clear skies it will turn chilly for a time during the evening. With rain moving in from the west, that means there'll be some hill snow for northern England and Scotland. Heavy rain elsewhere and accompanied by gusty winds, an unsettled night to come, and a chilly, grey, in places damp start to Friday. A lot of low cloud is expected first thing, as well as some further outbreaks of rain and drizzle, some heavier rain likely through southern counties of England into London and the southeast. That is moving through, though. Wales and the southwest by 7 a.m. starting to turn dry and brighter. Best of the sunshine through Northern Ireland, parts of western Scotland as well, although much of the rest of Scotland staying relatively gloomy with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. But the hill snow that we're expecting overnight, that's tending to fizzle away by dawn, and only a relatively few amount of roads affected by that. Now, the rain in the southeast does ease off during the afternoon, but it stays generally grey with some mist